So what are you seeing on the SaaS side of things here?
Yeah, well, you covered some of it, but maybe I'll repeat it a little bit. We certainly are observing a lot of different environments in terms of sectors, geolocations, size, what SaaS apps they have. But I think a lot of it starts with access, right? I mean, you mentioned 12 implants on a device, an endpoint. Access is king, right? But in terms of getting access, to echo some of your comments, the SIM swapping techniques, the MFA push spam, I think there's some pretty big headlines around some of those kinds of techniques. But we are seeing that, and we're seeing even SMB organizations that don't have a lot of employees are being forced to essentially disable push as a method for MFA, because it's just, you can annoy someone, or maybe you do it once and they just accidentally hit yes, right? Like it's basically too easy. Different methods of phishing. I think that's still real. You still see the, kind of Prince email scam type things, and those kinds of things. Token compromise, something that I think is gaining popularity from an attacker standpoint. Whether you're doing kind of adversary in the middle, where you're trying to log somebody in and basically copy the token in flight as it's generated, or maybe you're logging on to an endpoint and stealing tokens out of browsers, cookies out of browsers, and now you have that Okta session token that's valid for a while, or that Microsoft session token that's valid for maybe 28 days. Of course, things like credential attacks, just trying to get in, and a lot of these too are being targeted against these basically inactive, unused accounts where no one's really monitoring, right? Like someone left, the account's still turned on. Even if it emails you about a new MFA device or something, no one's checking that inbox, right? And then fortunately, we're seeing a downtick in basic auth, but we still are seeing situations where you don't need MFA. You can just log in. We are seeing things where something like Google Workspace or Microsoft, you can log in directly instead of being forced through that SSO provider. Maybe your organization thinks everyone has to go through SSO, but in reality, maybe that's not the case. And then persistence, staying in, as you mentioned, Alexi, adding new devices to MFA, or maybe disabling the need for MFA, password resets, just trying to get in and move quickly and stay in. Creation and modification of accounts, of course. If I can create a new account and just log in as that, maybe no one's monitoring that, or no one's changing its password. Things like inbox rules, right? Just trying to forward information or continue to extract information if I can't log in anymore. Mailbox delegation. If I can come in and log in and create an account, and maybe it's like the dean of a school or something, and create an account that has delegated mailbox access, I can now read all or see all that email and never have to log in as the actual VIP, right? And then creation and modification of OAuth apps, right? There's a lot of concern there, because it's basically a blind spot. No one's really monitoring that much around these integrations, these OAuth grants. If I can create an app that just has access, there's no kind of typical login flow I have to go through each time. That app might be active and authorized for a long time, maybe a year, maybe indefinite, right? And then finally, on the post auth, I know I'm saying a lot here, but some of it really depends on what they're trying to accomplish. Again, could be fraud and some of the wire transfer type engagement, where they're trying to manipulate a target using your identity and get them to transfer money or things like that. Different inbox rules, as Alexi just mentioned, looking for things like passwords and SSH keys and stuff. Unfortunately, that stuff is being seen in Box or SharePoint or some of these other SaaS apps. Certainly getting data out, right? Dumping Salesforce records and things like that. We're calling it SSO burst. I think you called it, Alexi, order everything on the menu, but it's not typical for a human to log in to every single app that's behind your SSO in a very short fashion. But an automated script or an adversary might do that, right? Which is, again, kind of a signal that maybe it's not that person. Talked a little bit about the payroll and invoice fraud, but seeing direct deposit information being changed in your HR platform, right? And then you only know about it if you're not monitoring for that kind of stuff once your employees don't get paid, which is pretty bad. And then, things, I think another thing too is email vault. type scanning. You get in and you start searching your email for certain terms, trying to gather intelligence, maybe M&A activity, maybe it's a reporter looking to write a story on your country or something, right? There's a lot of different reasons why you might want to stay in and just sort of scrape the email and collect it over time. But yeah, a lot of stuff we're seeing, a lot of stuff going on out there. But let me kick it back to you. So, there's a whole bunch of other stuff we haven't even covered. And again, we told you all on this call, like there's a lot, right? But Alexi, why don't you tell us about a couple of points right here?
Well, one sort of mentality note that I thought would be worth sharing is that in my experience, a lot of security engineers, and I've been this person too, when they hear about sort of an emerging tool that the business wants to use or a new technology that doesn't really fit their pre-existing ideas of what's secure or what they're familiar with, something that's less hard and crunchy. So, web-based services, maybe the web at all, and definitely SaaS, their instinct is to sort of wish it would go away, which is really, counter. It's a different side of, I think, most security engineers and incident responders. They're interested in change. They're change junkies. They want to know about new stuff. Otherwise, security probably wouldn't be that appealing. But when you're also responsible for trying to defend against that, and you're already feeling a little bit overburdened, you're just going to try and push it away. I think that we're really lucky these days that with the advent of SaaS platforms, I don't know, 10 years ago or more, you now have something like XDR where you can get all those logs fully, parsed and integrated, and the capabilities to do searches and enrichment. Which, if you're trying to build that in your own SIEM, if you're lucky enough to have like a fully functioning, like capable SIEM, it would just take you months, and you wouldn't be as good, and you wouldn't have the domain knowledge about what some of these event types really mean. And I think we're all counting our blessings that tools like XDR are available to be able to parse some of these SaaS platforms. Because those three platforms you have over there obviously a great interest for threat actors, maybe outside of Scatter, that have their business objectives maybe fully satisfied just by getting into something like Workday or ServiceNow, any of these HR, MS systems, and IT service desk systems. It's just a treasure trove of good information. And they're probably protected with SSO and maybe hopefully two-factor, and then that's it. And no one's watching what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Unless you're
yeah, for sure. And just to echo on that before I dive into a few other topics, these are big platforms. We get that none of us grew up defending Salesforce or Workday, and security teams, like you mentioned, Alexi, are probably already overburdened or very lean. But we are seeing, financially motivated attackers hit Workday. We are seeing more intelligence gathering, attackers and campaigns hitting things like Workday. ServiceNow, everyone's like, why would you hit ServiceNow? It's like, well, that's going to help you map out your target, right? I'm going to better understand who has the keys to the kingdom, where they are, those kinds of things, what versions of software and other, things are being run by seeing all the tickets and other information in ServiceNow. And then Salesforce has usually a ton of information about your vendors, your customers, et cetera. So yeah, a lot to go after. And then beyond that, we're going to talk, I think a bit more as we start to move in the latter half of this conversation into, preparing for IR and detections and things like that. But it's not just about that. It's also about trying to get ahead of it and harden. And we are seeing challenges where teams are, just trying to figure out what should they do, right? Again, prioritization problem, a lot of things on your plate. But, we are seeing things like privileged access, a lot of excessive users, maybe stale admins they left 3 years ago, and their global admin account's still sitting there. We see things like ghost admins where you're not labeled as an admin, but if you do a summation of all the different privileges you were granted, you're actually quite high up in the admin stack, right? You're what we call a ghost admin in places like Salesforce. Integrations, as are kind of listed up above, and quite frankly, I'm not maybe being fair, but I'm calling them SaaS backdoors because there's so many. You see these environments, and you'll have 20,000, 15,000 applications connected to Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 or these kinds of apps because they are truly platforms. And do you really know that your scope or your scale of integration is that high, right? And then when you see most of them aren't even being used anymore because they were used during development period, right? It's basically like the new sort of malware, the new PUP, unwanted program type issue that we ran into endpoint several years ago. And then, trying to just get hygiene around who's using what kind of shady personal VPNs, lots of PowerShell and Python, files shared with anonymous accounts, Gmail, Hotmail, like really hard to distinguish that between the good activity and the malicious activity, seeing things like Okta or SSO accounts disabled, but all of the kind of actual SaaS accounts are still enabled. They're all lingering, maybe still have activity. People still have valid tokens and can log in for a month after their departure or something like that. And then, we talked about users logging in directly to bypass SSO. So a lot out there, and we get it. There's a lot, that's what we're trying to do is help you focus a bit more. But moving on, in thinking about this, I think there's frameworks that are helpful, and certainly there's NIST and all these others that are, much more prescriptive. I think here the idea is, how do I even approach this? And this isn't necessarily very specific to SaaS. It's how we think about SaaS security, but you could really approach all security in this way. You need to set yourself up for success. You need to maximize actionability. You need to figure out, connect your SaaS apps. You need to understand what apps you want to defend. How are you going to operationalize those workflows? Can you automate? Can you send data into a generalized XDR platform, SOAR, et cetera? And then can you minimize your weakness, right? So that you are looking at fewer things. Minimize your weakness, harden your posture, manage your integrations, and then continuously monitor for attacks and stop them. And hopefully, be able to do this in a very rapid fashion. Alexi, anything to add on this?
Well, I would just note that you're going to see organizations with all different levels of maturity, but it's very clear that organizations that have gone through the effort to deploy in depth, following the sort of model you're covering there, are just going to be on a more comfortable footing when it comes time for potential IR than those who haven't. It really does make a big difference. I mean, you also consider that realistically, how many organizations are large enough to employ folks who are experts in Active Directory and Azure Active Directory security and to focus on that full time? Not that many. So I think tools like this as a kind of co-pilot to help coach you along the way really make a big difference.